Hey everyone, Effie here. Today I'm going to show you how I made this card using our Poppy Smile stamp set. It's a 4x6" photopolymer stamp set, and it features this beautiful poppy cluster image that is just so fun to watercolor. So let's get started with the stamping. I'm going to use my original Misty tool to help me ink this up with some watermark ink. Or some embossing ink, excuse me. So after I stamped it along one corner, I'm going to rotate my watercolor paper panel 180 degrees and stamp it one more time so that both opposite corners are stamped with this image. Then I'm going to spoon on some gold embossing powder and heat the whole panel with my heat gun. And this is just going to melt all of that beautiful powder, and it's going to leave a nice raised image that's going to help me watercolor. I'm using Ken Oliver color bursts to do my painting, and I just created this DIY palette. I will link it in the description box on how I made this palette. So let's do some wet and wet watercoloring. I just painted this area first with some clean water, and then I dropped in color bursts into the inner portions of my beautiful poppy. And then I'm going to take my medium tip brush and just blend some of that color out to the edges. So after I put in that base color, I'm going to move on to the second poppy and apply the same blending technique. Now, as that first poppy that I painted is drying, you can see that the original, blobs of fuchsia color burst paint it looks like it's drying in blocks. And I don't really like that it looks like kind of a circle within the poppy. It's too uniform. I need a little bit more contrast. So here I'm just going to add additional color bursts, fuchsia color bursts, paint or pigment along the lines of the poppy. And this is going to add some more variation in the color of my floral. Because when I originally dropped that fuchsia pigment into the center, as it expanded, it kind of expanded uniformly along the entire poppy. So now which is okay. When you guys are painting, just kind of go with it and figure out how you're going to fix. I don't want to say your mistake, because it's not really a mistake. You just want to expand upon your coloring. You want to layer upon your watercoloring. Here, I'm adding some, I think this is Marsala color burst into the inner portions of the poppy, and this is going to give it some additional shading. But as you can see, I'm just applying the same painting technique, and I'm layering upon my colors. So as I'm layering the colors, I'm not adding the clean water first. I'm just going straight in with my paintbrush, which I've dipped into the paint pan, and I'm adding the pigment directly onto the paper and then blending that pigment out. So when I say I'm using the same painting technique, I mean that blending technique. And you're going to continue doing this until you're satisfied with the saturation of color in the segments of your floral petals. So you can see that I have some really dark areas, and then I blend that color out to the edges of the petals, and then I try to leave the edges of the petals as light as I can. I want that gradation of color from really dark to really light so that we have some interest. Once I'm finished coloring in the poppies, I'm going to go ahead and paint in the foliage using sap green color bursts. And you can see that I am definitely not staying in the lines here, because I find that as I continue my watercoloring or creative journey, my style has been changing, and I'm not really focused on staying in the lines. I'm actually painting outside of the lines, and I'm blending colors, and I have some of the greens going into the reds and some of the red areas going into the greens. And this technique really just gives your painting style or the actual panel that you're painting a little bit more drama. There's more impact in your work, I feel like. So when you're painting, I want you to focus more on the forest instead of the trees. Try not to micromanage your painting while you're in the process of painting, because In the end, when you're all done and you step away from it for a little bit, you're going to come back to it with fresh eyes and you're going to see, oh, okay, this is not that bad. That's another tip. Don't be overcritical of yourself, especially when you're just starting out. Just experiment and have fun and just go with it. All right, for the second cluster of poppies, I did put down that initial layer of clean water, and then I was more intentional of the initial color burst pigment that I've put down. So I kind of went in streaks from the inner portions of the petal to the outer portions of the petal. I followed mainly the lines or curves within the petals. So you can see here I'm following the curves, and I'm a little bit more intentional with putting down that pigment than I was in the first cluster of poppies. And now I feel like I'm getting a better result by doing it this way, but I am a little bit rusty with my painting. At this point, this is maybe the second painting that I've done in a couple weeks. So sometimes it gets me a while to get started. But even though I use two similar but slightly different techniques on both clusters, I'm not going to trash the panel. I'm just going to go forward and finish up this panel and stick it out to the end. Because trust me, guys, at the end, you're not even going to notice that there's a difference in techniques that was applied to both floral clusters. So as I said earlier, I was a little bit rusty with my painting. My usual go-to technique is, wetting the paper first and then dropping the pigment into the inner portions of the petals. That is my original technique that I do like to fall back on as my default. So, if I haven't painted in a week or so, this is what I default to. So, after I finished painting that first cluster of poppies, I was a little bit more intentional with my strokes for this second poppy. And I find that with practice, my techniques are getting better and better, but at the same time, I'm not striving for perfection here. And now I'm just going to add that additional darker color burst pigment. I think this is Marsala or Merlot, but they're both very similar, so they're kind of interchangeable. If you have one or the other, it will work. I think the Merlot it's a little bit more red, and the Marsala has a little bit more of a plum undertone, but correct me if I'm wrong if you think differently. But whenever I'm adding a darker shade to my red or dark pinks, I use either or, Merlot or Marsala. Both work and they look beautiful. So I'm just going to add some additional sap green color bursts to the foliage, and you can see again, I am not staying within the lines. And as I'm painting here, I decide to get a little bit more adventurous. I want some more contrast. So I'm going to add some Terre, Vert, which is a nice deep green. And I'm adding it to certain portions of the leaves to give it some of that shaded interest. I also add some Chartreuse, and this is going to add some brightness to my overall panel. Chartreuse is usually something that I use as an undertone and not really a main green, but I really love the added interest that it lends to my panel. So here it is complete. That gold embossing is just gorgeous. So now I'm just going to stamp my sentiment. This label stamp is from our Regal Rose set, and I just stamped this using our Caviar Hybrid ink onto some white cardstock. After I stamped it, I trimmed it out and then I popped it up onto my panel. And then lastly, I'm just going to use our Dewdrop enamel dots and stick 3 on in a visual triangle, and my card is complete. I hope you guys enjoyed today's project and video. If you have not done so already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel because I'm trying to update our videos regularly and provide you some really good tips for your card making journey. So thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.